Yesterday we were looking at, first of all, how the first natives got here to America. At least the great possibility, according to my research, is that the majority of them came by boat, landing in the area of Central America. And then we looked at some of the other peoples that came to America long before Columbus, from different areas, from different parts of the world. There are a couple other things I wanted to point out to you concerning people that came here. I think the last one may have been that there's evidence that Hebrew people were here. There also is evidence of Greeks and Romans being in the New World. And we know that because of coins. Roman coins have been found in Venezuela and Maine. Roman coins were found in Texas at the bottom of an Indian mound at Round Rock. The mound is dated at approximately 800 AD. In 1957, near Phoenix City, Alabama, a small boy found a coin in a field from Syracuse on the island of Sicily, dating from 490 BC. Now, people don't carry around old coins usually. So if people have these coins and they're found there, it was people who lived at that time. I mean, that would be the normal thing. In the town of Heavener, Oklahoma, another out-of-place coin was found in 1976. Experts identified it as a bronze tetradrachma, originally struck in Antioch, Syria in 63 AD, and bearing the profile of the Emperor Nero. In 1882, a farmer in Cass County, Illinois, picked up a bronze coin, later identified as a coin of Antiochus IV, one of the kings of Syria, who reigned from 175 BC to 164 BC, and who is mentioned in the Bible. We know him as Antiochus Epiphanes. Pottery. Roman pottery was unearthed in Mexico that, according to its style, has been dated to the 2nd century AD. Inscriptions. In 1966, a man named Manfred Metcalf stumbled upon a stone in the state of Georgia that bears an inscription that is very similar to ancient writing from the island of Crete called Cretan linear A and B writing. In the early 1900s, Bernardo da Silva Ramos, a Brazilian rubber tapper working in the Amazon jungle, found many large rocks on which was inscribed more than 2,000 ancient scripts about the Old World. Near Rio de Janeiro, high on a vertical wall of rock, 3,000 feet up, is an inscription that reads, Tyre, Phoenicia, Badazir, firstborn of Jethbaal, and dated to the middle of the 9th century BC. Near Palahibra, Brazil, an inscription on Phoenician has been translated in part as, "We are sons of Canaan from Sidon, the city of the king." Do you remember where Sidon is? Sidon is just north of Israel. Remember Tyre and Sidon were the two Phoenician cities along the coast there in the Mediterranean? We set, and by that they mean sacrificed, a youth for the exalted gods and goddesses in the 19th year of Hiram, our mighty king. We embarked from Ezion-Geber into the Red Sea and voyaged with 10 ships. We were at sea together for 2 years around the land belonging to Ham. What land would that be? The land belonging to Ham. Africa. But were separated by a storm. And the note here, literally from the hand of Baal. And we were no longer with our companions. So we have come here, 12 men and 3 women, on a shore which I, the admiral, control. But auspiciously may the gods and goddesses favor us. Now, Hiram, we know, was the king of Lebanon, up in the area of Tyre and Sidon, when Solomon built his temple. Hiram sent lumber for him to use in the temple. And of course, that is, well, many years before Christ. The Kensington runestone I've already told you about, that has an inscription describing an expedition of Norsemen or Vikings, which they estimate took place in the 1300s. In 1980, a couple of people from the zoological gardens, Salt Lake City, visited a rock outcropping in Colorado that was reputed to be inscribed with peculiar markings. They believe they are excellent examples of Consane Ogham writing, a type ascribed to ancient Celts. One of the many inscriptions was translated as Route Guide. To the west is the frontier town with standing stones as boundary markers. A round fist-sized stone was found during the early 1890s in a cemetery near Nashville, Tennessee. Its front was inscribed with symbols thought to be Libyan, which is in northern Africa, pre-100 AD style. It translates as the colonists pledged to redeem. Now, in addition to these kind of things that have been found, an experienced botanist has identified plants in an ancient fresco painting as a pineapple and a specific species of squash, both native to the Americas. But the fresco is in the Roman city of Pompeii. Statues. In 1933, in a burial at a city in Mexico, archaeologists discovered a small carved head with foreign features in an undisturbed burial site. It was later identified by an anthropologist as unquestionably from the Hellenistic Roman school of art and suggested a date of around AD 200. Structures. Many stone chambers dot the New England countryside, and most archaeologists insist that they are all potato cellars built long ago by farmers. Others argue that they are too sophisticated for such a mundane application. One is built into a hillside at Upton, Massachusetts, has sophisticated corbelling that follows the style of Irish and Iberic chambers. It's theorized that it was really built by Europeans around 700 AD, long before the Leif Erikson voyage. Ships. In 1886, the remains of a shipwreck was found in Galveston Bay, Texas. Its construction is typically Roman. Toys. A doll made of wood and wax was found deep in a well of sacrifice at a city in Mexico on which is written Roman script. Tombs. In the Mayan ruins of Palenque, a stone sarcophagus was found that is very much in the style of the ancient Phoenicians. And in fact, the Phoenicians, remember, were the great sailors of the Mediterranean Sea, and I would contend that they sailed further than the Mediterranean. I believe that they sailed out around Africa and even to America. They possibly came to Central America between 1000 BC and AD 300. And that may be the origin of the likenesses that we saw, those heads that looked like they were from Africa. Remember, the Phoenicians were descendants of Ham, so they were black people. Indians elsewhere in Mexico created small ceramic and stone sculptures of what seemed to be Caucasoid and Negroid faces, that is, people that are white-skinned and people that are black-skinned. There are also similarities in looms, identical strains of cotton, and information in Arab historical sources about extensive ocean navigation by Africans and Phoenicians in the 8th century BC. Native Americans also crossed the Atlantic. It wasn't just people going to America. There were Native Americans across the Atlantic from Canada to Scandinavia or Scotland. In fact, 2 Indians shipwrecked in Holland around 60 BC. The Arawaks in Haiti were found by Columbus to possess some spear points made of guanine. I mentioned this the other day, which they said they got from black traders who had come from the south and east. This mineral proved to be identical to an alloy used by West Africans who also called it guanine. Traces of diseases common in Africa have been detected in pre-Columbian, that is before Columbus, corpses in Brazil. Columbus's son Ferdinand reported black-skinned people in eastern Honduras. Balboa reported seeing black slaves in an Indian town in Panama. The Indians said they had captured them from a nearby black community. A map found in Turkey dated 1513 is based on material from the Library of Alexander the Great and includes coastline details of South America and Antarctica. So there's a pile of evidence that there had been a lot of contact between the rest of the world and the Americas before Columbus. It's just that most of Europe was ignorant about all of that contact. And let's see, we talked about the Vikings before, St. Brendan, European fishermen, and the Chinese in 1421. Okay, next in your notes, and I think this is the part you could fill in, is called Sugar and Spice, the Portuguese Exploration. So we want to look at who these explorers were and what they were doing. So apparently have the wrong up here. Let's see. Okay, it's early in the school year. Technical difficulties occur, although not limited to early in the school year. So fine. Map, there it is. Okay, Portugal. Everybody know where Portugal is? Or was? Shake your heads if you, yes or no, do you know where Portugal is? Okay, some of you are not too sure. Way up there, where it says Lisbon. Spain is the largest country on the Iberian Peninsula. Portugal is to the west. Portuguese sailors were trying to find a way to get over to Asia. As we said before, products from Asia had become very popular in Europe and were expensive because they were brought by Arab traders over to the Mediterranean, picked up there by Italian merchants, and then the Italian merchants, of course, added quite a bit onto their profit. So the Portuguese were looking for a way to get there to get the products themselves. And they thought it must be a way to get around Africa and get over to Asia. And so that's what they set out to do. So who was the first person who sailed along the coast of Africa for the Portuguese? You have this in your notes? Who was it, Megan? Right, Bartholomew Diaz. And what he did is he sailed along the coast until he got down here. And at this point, he realized that this was the turning point to get around. So rather than going on, though, he went back to Portugal. Now, I have wondered, and maybe you too have wondered, how did he know that he had reached the point where Africa was turning and he was going to be entering where he could go to Asia? Do you see what I mean? How did he know it wasn't here? Because that looks like that's turning, but it doesn't. It keeps going. How did he know when he got down here? I've never seen anybody talk about it. I've never seen anybody write about this. You have an idea? Well, here's a picture of the Cape of Good Hope that my wife took when she was there. We have a little bit too much light in here to see it clearly. Fortunately, I have another one. I don't know if you can see it well or not, but do you notice anything about the water? Can you see it, Jessica? Two different colors. You see that here and here? That's at the Cape of Good Hope. That's where Diaz came. I think that when he saw the different colored ocean, he knew that he was going from one ocean to another because of the color difference. And by that, he knew that he had rounded what was the last barrier to get to Asia. Does that make sense? That's my theory. Never seen it anywhere, but when I saw that picture, when she brought that back from South Africa, I said, whoa, now I get it. Now I understand. Now I know why he turned around and said, here's the way to go. Now, when Diaz was at the Cave of Good Hope, he may have seen this. Not sure, but maybe he did. All right. You're not impressed.
I'm impressed.
Let's see. I don't have. Let's go back and talk about the next Portuguese explorer. Who was that?
Vasco da Gama.
Right. And what did he do?
He furthered the discovery.
To where? Even?
India?
Yeah, so he went all the way around then. He followed Diaz and kept going all the way around to India. And so that established a trade route for the Portuguese to Asia, to India. So that's pretty much the Portuguese part of it. So next we move on to the Spanish. They were also looking for a way to get to Asia. They were in competition, but they had a lot of problems of their own to deal with first. The Moors, who were not Moor, Moor, M-O-O-R, had invaded Spain. They were Arab Muslims who had come from Africa, and they had taken over much of the Iberian Peninsula. Slowly, over hundreds of years, the native Spaniards who were Christian drove them out. So they weren't real concerned about finding a way to get to Asia. But this guy named Christopher Columbus came along, and he had tried every nation in Europe to back him up on his idea of going west across the ocean in order to get to the east, that is Asia. And people did not go for it. The Spanish monarchs did not go for it either, but as Columbus was despairing and was ready to go try somewhere else, there was a priest that came and said, come and try again. I think maybe the queen will listen. And so he went back, and the Queen Isabella, she was married to King Ferdinand. Queen Isabella was so jubilant at having driven out the Moors. They finally had their final victory over them in 1492, that she decided that, in thanks to God, that she would supply Columbus on his voyage, primarily to take the gospel to those people in Asia. And so that's how Columbus got his funding. Now, what was different about what Columbus believed? Why was it that people did not want to sponsor him in going across the ocean west in order to get the east? What have you been told about that? Sally?
People thought the earth was flat, so they thought you were just going to sail and roll off.
Yeah, how many have heard that? Everybody thought the world was flat, and so they didn't believe Columbus was the one that believed it was round. Okay, that's absolutely false. If you've been told that, sorry. There are a lot of things that sometimes make their ways into history books. In fact, I don't think that idea was even around before 18th century, maybe. Simply not true. I first discovered the falsity of that idea when I was reading St. Augustine's City of God. Because in that book, Augustine speculates as to whether people live on the other side of the world. I thought, well, Augustine apparently knew the world was round. He just didn't think anybody lived on the other side. And I began to research it more and more, and I couldn't find anybody that thought the world was flat, except for some maybe ancient ideas about the world being on the back of a turtle and things like that. But even Alice, you remember Alice? He held the world on his shoulders. A spherical world. The Greeks knew it was spherical, and so did all Europeans. So there wasn't anybody that turned Columbus down because they thought the world was flat. Why did they turn him down then? They turned him down because they said it's too far. You'll never make it. They were right. If Columbus had not bumped into America, they would have died out there in the ocean. Because Columbus was using the calculations of Ptolemy, a 2nd century Greek geographer, who underestimated the circumference of the earth. See, they were talking about that back in ancient Greece. He underestimated the circumference of the earth by some 5,000 miles. Now, if you're talking about an ocean between Europe and Asia, and you're 5,000 miles off, you're not going to make it, right? You can't carry that much supply. So Columbus believed Japan was only 3,000 miles to the west from Europe, and it was actually 11,000 miles. Columbus knew he had enough to get to Japan, 3,000 miles. In reality, it's a good thing that America was there, otherwise they would have all died. He believed that he was on a mission from God, and God actually had him on a mission, apparently, but Columbus was wrong. Everybody else was right. It was too big if America wasn't in the way. Well, Columbus, this is a map that was drawn from the calculations of Ptolemy, who underestimated the circumference of the earth. This is showing the routes of Columbus. You can follow him as he goes. There, I won't be able to keep up with him as you go day by day, but you can see what's happening. Columbus had said in his diary, "It was the Lord who put it into my heart to sail from here to the Indies. All who heard of my project rejected it with laughter, ridiculing me. There is no question that the inspiration was from the Holy Spirit, because he comforted me with rays of marvelous illumination from the Holy Scriptures, encouraging me to press forward, and without ceasing for a moment, they now encourage me to make haste." So Columbus saw himself as on a mission from God. King John II of Portugal, Henry VII of England, Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain all rejected his idea, but eventually the Spanish monarchs believed that God had granted them a tremendous victory, and in gratitude would send Columbus to discover new lands for the glory of God and his church, and to spread the gospel of the Holy Savior to the ends of the earth. Now, once Columbus had their support, he started to become greedy. He stipulated that he receive 1/10 of all riches found. He stipulated that he would be given the rank of admiral of the ocean sea, and the positions of both viceroy and governor of all discovered lands. Seems like he got his focus off the gospel already. He was summarily dismissed, and except for the kind intervention by the Queen's diplomat to change their minds, he never would have made the voyage. He was given the money to outfit his 3 ships, and he prepared to engage in the voyage of discovery. Now, in the same year that Columbus made his voyage, the Spaniards had driven out the Moors, and they also initiated what's called the Inquisition. How many of you have ever heard of the Inquisition? All right, it was a time where the Roman Catholic Church and the Spanish monarchs in particular in Spain were trying to root out any disagreement with the church. And there was an idea that in Spain, there were a lot of Jews living in Spain, and that many of them had falsely converted to Christianity in order to avoid persecution, and that they weren't true Christians. And so the Inquisition was in part to root those people out, and they used torture in order to do that. And if you were not a converted Jew, if you were a Jew that remained a Jew, in 1492, you were given 3 months to get out of the country. So at the same time they're talking about taking the gospel to foreign lands, they're kicking all the Jews out of their country. And by the way, you can't take any gold or silver with you or any of your property. Some think that Columbus may have been looking for a place for Jews to go too, because a lot of the names of his sailors sound Jewish. I don't know if that's true or not. Well, you can see on the map as it proceeds, if you look back at the beginning of it, Columbus and his ships reached Gran Canaria Island on August 9th, re-provisioned and made repairs before launching out into the Atlantic Ocean on September 8th. Now he knew that below the Tropic of Cancer, here, that below that line, the winds became northeasterly, which would take him westward. And the westerly winds north of that latitude would bring him home again. So this may not be quite accurate. He's down below going there, and then he'll be above it coming back. According to his journals, Columbus took his given name Christopher very seriously. Anybody know what the name Christopher means? No? Chris, with a T on there, is Christ. Opher means bearer, Christ bearer. So bearer of Christ, someone who was bearing Christ. He often quoted verses like those in Isaiah 49. He said, "Listen to me, O islands," is what he wrote in quoting that, "and pay attention, you peoples from afar. The Lord called me from the womb. From the body of my mother, he named me." He was named Christopher. "I will also make you a light of the nations, so that my salvation may reach the end of the earth." He saw himself as being that person who would take the gospel to the end of the earth. Well, although fame and fortune seemed to be paramount in his mind, there was also the purpose of carrying the gospel to the heathen of the East. Now, the weather on the way there was wonderful, but the sailors grew restless as they proceeded further and further from land with no end in sight. After all, none of them had been any further than 300 miles from land before. And they were well over 3,000 as they were out in the ocean. The Pinzon brothers, captains of the Nina and the Pinta, advised Columbus of the mutinous attitude displayed by their crews, but they agreed to give him 3 more days before turning back. In reality, they had probably already gone further than their provisions would allow for a safe return. In other words, they were already beyond the point of return. If they had tried to return at that time, they would never have made it back. But the sailors and the other captains did not know that, because Columbus was keeping 2 sets of books. He was keeping a log on the ship, on the deck, which told how far they had gone, but he wasn't being truthful in that one. He kept a log in his own cabin of how far they had really gone. If the sailors had knew how far they had really gone, they would have been in great panic. But Columbus indicated that they hadn't gone all that far. They still had a chance to return if they needed to. Well, after being given 3 more days, his journal records the next morning, October 10th, that they had gone further the previous day than any other. So they sailed faster that day than any day before, which further alarmed the sailors. Now they're getting further away from Spain, or Portugal, Spain. On the morning of the 11th, the Pinta spotted a reed and a small piece of wood carved by a man, while on the Nina they sighted a small twig with roses on it. What's that tell you? We're near land. A prize was promised to the one to spot land, and the ships, whoever spotted land first was going to be given a prize. And they were so excited about that that they sailed through the night. At 10 p.m., a tiny light was sighted far ahead. At 2 a.m., aboard the Pinta, the cry of "Tierra! Tierra!" sprang out. What's tierra? That's the Spanish for land. And the lookout spied what appeared to be a low white cliff shining in the moonlight. Columbus landed on shore as dawn arrived, carrying the royal standard, and he planted it there. He christened the island San Salvador. You know what that means? Any Spanish students in here? Holy Savior. And he prayed, O Lord, Almighty and everlasting God, by thy holy word thou hast created the heaven and the earth and the sea. Blessed and glorified be thy name, and praised be thy majesty, which hath deigned to use us, thy humble servants, and that thy holy name may be proclaimed in this second part of the earth. Now, the natives who were there saw them landing and weren't sure quite what to make of them. When it became apparent to them that these gods, as they thought, bore them no ill intent, they came out from their hiding. Columbus recorded his admiration of their handsomeness, but he noted that they wore little clothing and were unenlightened about the tools of war. He says, for I showed them swords, and they took them by the blade and cut themselves through ignorance. They didn't know which end to grab a hold of. He further records, so that they might be well disposed towards us, for I knew that they were a people to be delivered and converted to our holy faith, rather by love than by force. I gave to some red caps, and to others glass beads, which they hung around their necks, and many other things. At this they were greatly pleased, and became so entirely our friends that it was a wonder to see. I believed that they would easily be made Christians, for it seemed to me that they had no religion of their own. Our Lord willing, when I depart, I shall bring back 6 of them to your highnesses. He's writing to King and Queen, that they may learn to talk our language. Now that set an unfortunate precedent of forcibly taking people from their homes, as he was going to take 6 of them back. But another unfortunate precedent was established when Columbus noticed the tiny gold ornaments in some of their noses. This set Columbus and his men in a fervent search for gold, taking them next to Cuba and then to other islands. We'll find out what happens next tomorrow.